He built an empire. Towers with his name. Billions in the bank. But standing at his daughter's grave on her birthday, he felt like the poorest man alive. Every year, the same ritual. Flowers. Silence. And the weight of all the moments he missed while chasing zeros instead of memories. But this time, something was different. There was a man there. A janitor, by the looks of his uniform. And he was crying. Not just tears, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep. A little girl stood beside him, holding a small handmade card. The billionaire froze. He wanted to leave. This was his private moment, his sacred grief. But something made him stay. Something in the way that man touched the gravestone. The way he whispered something the billionaire couldn't hear. The way that little girl placed her tiny hand on his shoulder, trying to comfort him. Who was this man? How did he know his daughter? And then it hit him, a question that would change everything. What if the person who knew his daughter best, wasn't him at all? In the next few minutes, you're about to witness a story that will make you reconsider what it really means to be rich. To be present. To matter in someone's life. Before we dive into this interesting story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Drop a comment below telling us the time of where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into the story. The wind cut through the hilltop cemetery like a whisper from the dead. Rowan Vale stepped out of his black car, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. 6 years. 6 years of coming to this grave. 6 years of rehearsing the same words he could never say out loud. He was a billionaire. Men feared him. Magazines celebrated him. Competitors envied him. But none of that prepared him for the shame of showing up as a father who arrived too late. His driver stayed behind as Rowan made the walk alone. The same walk he made every month. The same guilt pressing down on his chest like a boulder. But today, something was wrong. He noticed movement near the grave before he reached it. Someone was kneeling in front of his daughter's headstone. Not a wealthy mourner. Not a polished stranger. A janitor. Blue uniform. Worn sleeves. Hands rough from years of labor. The man was leaning forward in the snow, crying silently into his palms. And pressed against his side was a little girl. No more than 5 or 6 years old. Rowan's feet stopped moving. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and throat. The child had hair the color of sunset gold. The exact shade his daughter once had. The shade her mother used to braid on Sunday mornings while humming old songs. Why would a janitor be crying at his daughter's grave? Why would a child who looked exactly like her be standing there as if she belonged? The janitor noticed him and stiffened instantly. He pulled the girl behind him like a shield. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We won't be long." But Rowan wasn't listening. His eyes had fallen to the drawing clutched in the child's small hand. It was a picture of a smiling woman holding hands with a little girl. The woman had sunset gold hair. The woman had his daughter's face. No one should have known her well enough to draw her. No child should look this much like her. No stranger should be weeping over her grave with that kind of grief carved into his bones. Rowan stepped closer. His voice came out low and tight. "Who are you?" The janitor hesitated. His eyes flickered between fear and something deeper. Something that looked like heartbreak. The little girl peeked around him, bright eyes full of innocent curiosity. She looked at Rowan like she was seeing someone familiar. Someone she had been waiting for. Then she asked a question that shattered his entire world. "Mister, do you know my mommy?" Rowan felt the ground tilt beneath him. My mommy. Those 2 words echoed in his skull like thunder. He wanted to speak but every possible answer led somewhere terrifying. The janitor pulled the girl closer. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "This was a mistake. Come on, sweetheart. We should go. But Rowan held up a hand. His chest felt like it was caving in. Please, he said quietly. Tell me why you're here. Why does she look like my daughter? The child stepped forward before the janitor could stop her. She held out the drawing. Rowan's hands trembled as he took it. It wasn't just any sketch. It was a moment he recognized. His daughter and a toddler are sitting under a tree, sharing a juice box. He had seen that tree before. In photos his daughter once posted online. Photos he had ignored during their years of silence. The janitor swallowed hard. She shouldn't have come, he said, voice cracking. She saw the name on the headstone a few weeks ago. She stopped and said she knew that face. Rowan's head snapped up. Knew her? How? The janitor looked down at the girl with something between wonder and sorrow. Because she sees her in dreams. Every night. She draws her. Talk to her. She says the woman sings to her. A chill crawled up Rowan's spine. His daughter had been an artist. She used to sing softly when she was nervous. These were details no stranger could guess. Details that lived only in memory. Rowan knelt slowly until his eyes were level with the child's. What's your name? He asked gently. Lyron, she said shyly. Did you know my mommy too? The question hit him like a blade. She wasn't asking with suspicion. She was asking with hope. A hope so pure it made his chest ache. Because nothing made sense yet everything inside him screamed that this child was connected to the daughter he had failed. He turned back to the janitor. Tell me the truth. Why are you crying at her grave? The man finally broke. His shoulders dropped. His voice cracked wide open. Because I promised someone I would protect her child. Rowan felt the world shrink to a single point. Protect her child. His daughter had died single. Alone. No attachments. Or so he believed. His voice barely formed the next words. Whose child? The janitor looked away. His silence screamed louder than any answer ever could. Lyron tugged gently on Rowan's sleeve. She looked up at him with eyes that held no fear. Only warmth. Only trust. And then she whispered something that made his knees nearly buckle. My mommy, she had your eyes too. Rowan stared at her. The same nose. The same chin. The same sunset gold hair. And now she was telling him their eyes matched. Was this child saying what he thought she was saying? Was his daughter not as alone as he believed when she died? Did she leave behind something more precious than memories? But if that was true, then where had this child been for 6 years? Why had no one told him? And why was a janitor the one raising her? What satisfies a man who has everything, when he discovers the one thing money could never buy was waiting for him in a graveyard? The answer was standing right in front of him. Holding a crayon drawing. Wearing a second-hand coat. Looking at him like he was the missing piece of a puzzle she had been solving her whole short life. And Rowan Vale, the man who controlled boardrooms and billions, had never felt more powerless. Rowan felt the ground shift beneath him as the child's words echoed in his skull. My mommy. She had your eyes too. No part of him wanted to speak because every possible answer placed him at the center of a truth he had been running from for 6 unbearable years. The janitor pulled Lyron closer and muttered, I'm sorry, this was a mistake. Come on, sweetheart. We should go. But Rowan held up a hand, the weight of confusion and dread pressing so hard on his chest he could barely breathe. Please, he said quietly, tell me why you're here. Why does she look like my daughter? Lyron stepped forward before the janitor could stop her. She held out the drawing and Rowan's breath stuttered like a broken engine. It wasn't just any picture. It was a moment he recognized. A moment he was never present for. His daughter and a toddler are sitting under a tree, sharing a juice box. He had seen that tree only in photos his daughter once posted online. Photos he scrolled past during their estrangement. Photos he never liked, never commented on, never acknowledged. The janitor swallowed hard, his voice cracking under the weight of what he was about to say. She shouldn't have come. She saw the name on the stone a few weeks ago when we were walking past. She stopped and said she knew that face. Rowan's head snapped up. Knew her? How? The janitor hesitated, then exhaled in defeat. Because she sees her in dreams. Every night. She draws her. Talk to her. She says the woman sings to her. A cold tremor crawled up Rowan's spine and settled deep in his bones. His daughter had been an artist. She used to sing softly when she was nervous. She hummed melodies no one else remembered. These details were intimate. Impossible for a stranger to guess. Impossible for a child this young to fabricate. Rowan knelt slowly so he could meet the girl's eye level. His knees pressed into the cold wet earth, but he didn't care. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lyron," she said shyly. "Did you know my mommy too?" Rowan's heart wrenched so hard he thought it might stop. She wasn't asking with suspicion. She was asking with hope. A fragile, innocent hope that felt like a knife twisting in his chest because nothing made sense, yet everything inside him screamed that this child was connected to the daughter he failed. He turned to the janitor again, voice low and unsteady. "Tell me the truth. Why are you crying at her grave?" The man finally broke. His shoulders dropped like he had been carrying a boulder for years and could no longer hold it. "Because I promised someone I would protect her child." Rowan felt the world narrow to a single suffocating point. Protect her child. His daughter had died single. Alone. No partner. No family. Or so he believed. His voice barely formed the next words. "Whose child?" The janitor looked away, and his silence answered more powerfully than any words ever could. Lyron clutched Rowan's sleeve and whispered with the kind of certainty only children possess. "My mommy, she had your eyes too." Rowan stared at her. The same copper hair. The same delicate nose. The same curious tilt of the head his daughter used to have when she was thinking. And now this child was telling him their eyes matched. If what she was saying was true, then his daughter had not died alone. She had left behind a living piece of herself. A piece no one ever told him about. A piece that had been surviving without him for 6 long years. But why? Why had no one contacted him? Why had this child grown up in the care of a janitor instead of her own grandfather? What happened in those final days that kept this secret buried so deep? Rowan looked at the janitor with new eyes. This man wasn't a stranger trespassing on grief. He was a guardian. A protector. Someone who had stepped into a role Rowan never knew existed. "How long?" Rowan asked, his voice rough. "How long have you been raising her?" The janitor met his gaze without flinching. "Since the day she was born." Rowan's chest tightened. "And you never thought to find me?" The janitor's eyes flickered with something sharp. Something that looked almost like anger. "I tried. Everyone tried. But you were unreachable. You were always unreachable." The words landed like a slap. Rowan remembered that period. The overseas meetings. The endless calls he ignored. The unknown numbers he dismissed because nothing felt more important than business. He had built an empire while his daughter died waiting for him to pick up the phone. And now her child stood before him, looking at him like he was the answer to a question she had been asking her whole life. Lyron tugged his sleeve again. "Mister, are you okay?" Rowan looked down at her and felt something crack inside him. A wall he had built years ago to protect himself from guilt. A wall that was crumbling with every second he spent looking into this little girl's eyes. What do you do when you discover the family you thought you lost left behind the one thing you never knew you needed? Rowan didn't have an answer yet. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't leaving this cemetery without the truth. No matter how much it destroyed him. Rowan's pulse hammered through his veins as he stared at Lyron. The janitor motioned for him to follow away from the grave, signaling the driver to keep his distance. Lyron held Rowan's hand as though it was the most natural thing in the world, and that simple gesture felt like a truth more undeniable than anything spoken. They walked to a stone bench near an old oak tree. The janitor sat heavily, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. Rowan remained standing, unable to sit, unable to breathe properly. "My name is Holden Pierce," the janitor said quietly. "I work maintenance at the hospital. I'm no one important." Rowan's voice was tight. "Start from the beginning." Holden took a long breath, his eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to stretch back years. 6.5 years ago, your daughter came into the emergency room with a man. He was badly hurt. A car crash. They were engaged, secretly I think. They seemed deeply in love. She stayed by his side every second, never leaving him alone for a moment. Rowan's stomach twisted violently. His daughter had died around that same time. A different accident. That's what he was told. He felt sick as the pieces started connecting in ways he wasn't ready for. Holden continued, his voice shaking. "I was on night duty. I saw them a lot during those final hours. The man kept apologizing to her. She kept telling him their baby would have a good life no matter what happened." Rowan didn't move. He didn't blink. The word hit him like a truck and left him standing in the wreckage. "Baby," he whispered. Holden nodded slowly. "Your daughter was pregnant. Very pregnant. She kept holding her stomach. Kept whispering to the baby that everything was going to be okay. But the fiancé didn't make it." He swallowed hard, his next words landing like stones. "And neither did she." The world dimmed around Rowan as the full weight of what Holden was saying crushed down on him. "No," Rowan said fiercely. "No one told me she was pregnant. No one said anything about a baby." Holden looked up at him with a mix of pity and quiet anger. "Because no one could reach you. Her phone logs. Her messages. Even the hospital tried calling her emergency contact. You were unreachable for 2 days." Rowan staggered backward like he had been struck. He remembered that week with painful clarity now. Overseas meetings. Back-to-back negotiations. Unknown numbers he dismissed without a second thought. Calls he silenced because nothing seemed more urgent than closing deals. Holden's voice softened but the words cut deeper than any knife. "She died, but the baby didn't." Rowan's gaze snapped to Lyron, who was humming softly to herself as she traced patterns on the stone bench with her tiny finger. Sunset gold hair catching the pale light. His daughter's nose. Her fiancé's dimples. Something inside Rowan cracked beyond repair. "She's my granddaughter," he whispered, the words barely escaping his throat. Holden nodded. "She was born early. Fragile. No family came. No one answered the calls. I couldn't watch her go into the system. My brother had just died and I had space in my life, space in my home. I took her in because I thought it's what her mother would have wanted." Everything inside Rowan collapsed into a guilt so heavy he could barely remain upright. He had been sitting in boardrooms while his daughter bled out in a hospital bed. He had been reviewing contracts while his grandchild took her first breath with no family to hold her. He turned to Holden, voice hollow and broken. "Why didn't you come to me?" Holden looked away, jaw tight. "Because you didn't come for her. Why would you come for her child?" The words were simple but they destroyed Rowan completely. He had no defense. No excuse. No explanation that could undo 6 years of absence. Holden stood slowly and looked Rowan in the eye. I didn't raise Lyran for money. I didn't raise her for recognition. I raised her because she deserved someone who would show up. And for 6 years, that person wasn't you. Rowan absorbed the blow in silence. He deserved every word. He had chosen empire over family. He had chosen silence over reconciliation. And now he was standing in a cemetery learning that his daughter died, still hoping he would answer the phone. Lyran tugged on his coat and looked up at him with those bright innocent eyes. Are you sad, mister? Rowan knelt down to her level, his voice cracking. Yes, sweetheart. I'm very sad. She tilted her head and smiled softly. Mommy says it's okay to be sad. She says sad people just need someone to hold their hand. She reached out and placed her small hand in his. Rowan felt tears burn at the edges of his eyes for the first time in years. This child had every reason to fear strangers, every reason to pull away. But instead she was offering him comfort like she had known him her whole life. How does a man who built an empire from nothing rebuild a family he never knew existed? Rowan didn't know the answer yet. But as Lyran's tiny hand squeezed his, he realized the journey to finding out had already begun. And there was no turning back now. Rowan sat beside Holden slowly, his body feeling like it had aged 10 years in a single minute. He had spent years burying himself in work, wealth, and distractions. Anything to silence the guilt of losing his daughter before he could fix their broken relationship. But hearing how she truly died, pregnant and scared, calling for a father who never picked up, shredded every defense he had left. Lyran climbed onto Holden's lap and rested her head against his chest. Her tiny fingers clutched the fabric of his uniform with a trust that only comes from years of being loved. Rowan watched the tenderness between them and felt a sharp twist of jealousy mixed with gratitude. This man had done what Rowan should have done. This stranger had become family while Rowan remained a ghost. Holden continued speaking, his voice steady but heavy. I didn't plan to raise a child. I wasn't ready. But when I saw her in that hospital, so small, barely breathing, I knew I couldn't let her disappear into the system. She reminded me of her mother from the very first moment. The way she held my finger on the first day, like she had already decided I was hers. Rowan's voice cracked as he spoke. I should have been there. Holden didn't soften the blow. Yes. You should have. Rowan accepted it without argument. He deserved far worse. She hated me when she left, he admitted quietly. She told me she never wanted my money. She just wanted me. She begged me to see her. To hear her. To choose her over the company, over the deals, over everything I thought mattered. And I didn't listen. I kept pushing her toward responsibilities she never asked for. I thought I was preparing her for greatness. I didn't realize I was pushing her out the door. Holden's expression softened just slightly. She talked about you, you know. At the hospital. Not in anger. She wanted you to meet your grandchild. She kept saying she hoped you would change someday. She kept believing you would show up. Rowan felt tears burn at the edges of his eyes, tears he hadn't allowed himself in years. His daughter had died with hope still alive in her heart. I hope he never earns it. I hope he is crushed by staying silent. Why bring Lyran here today? Rowan asked, his voice barely steady. Because she asked, Holden replied simply. She said she dreamed of a woman with sunset hair who told her to visit today. She wouldn't stop crying until I brought her. Rowan's stomach tightened. His daughter used to talk about vivid dreams when she was young. She believed in signs, in messages, in things Rowan always dismissed as nonsense. But Lyran coming to this grave on this exact day felt too perfect to be coincidence. It felt like something beyond explanation. Rowan turned to the little girl, his voice gentle. Sweetheart, what do you see in your dreams? Lyran looked at him with pure sincerity, no hesitation, no fear. A pretty lady. She sings to me. She tells me stories about stars and flowers and a house by a lake. She says she's waiting for you to come home. Rowan closed his eyes as the weight of her words pressed down on his chest. His daughter had once dreamed of building a lake house. She mentioned it when she was 16, excited and full of plans. He had dismissed it as a childish fantasy. He told her to focus on real goals, practical ambitions, things that would secure her future. He never imagined that dream would outlive her. That it would pass to a child who never met her but somehow carried her spirit. Holden watched Rowan carefully before speaking again. "What do you want to do now, Mr. Vale?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. The question was too big, too heavy. He had spent 6 years avoiding the past, running from guilt, filling the emptiness with success that meant nothing. But now the past was standing in front of him with sunset gold hair and innocent eyes. The past was holding his hand and asking if he knew her mommy. He couldn't run anymore. He didn't want to. Rowan finally spoke, his voice low but certain. "I want to know my granddaughter." Holden studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of insincerity. "Wanting to know her and being good for her are not the same thing," he said firmly. "She's not a business asset. She's not a legacy piece. She's a child who has already lost everyone connected to her bloodline except you." Rowan nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm not here to take her from you. I'm not here to replace what you've built. I just want the chance to be part of her life. To do for her what I failed to do for her mother." Lyran looked up at both men, sensing the weight of the moment even if she didn't fully understand it. She tugged Rowan's sleeve and smiled. "Mommy says you're trying now. She says she's proud." Rowan's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same breath. His daughter was gone. But somehow, through this child, she was still speaking to him. Still reaching out. Still believing he could change. Can a man who failed his daughter ever truly earn the right to love her child? Rowan didn't know yet. But he was determined to spend the rest of his life finding out. Holden stiffened at Rowan's words, pulling Lyran a little closer like a shield. "Wanting to know her and being good for her are not the same thing," he said firmly. "She's not a business asset. She's not a legacy piece. She's a child who has already lost everyone connected to her bloodline except you." Rowan nodded without defense. "I understand. I'm not here to take her from you." Holden studied him with eyes sharpened by years of protecting this little girl from a world that had already taken so much from her. "Then what are you here to do?" Rowan looked at Lyran, truly looked at her for the first time without the fog of shock clouding his vision. She was humming softly to herself, swinging her legs gently, drawing invisible circles on the bench with her fingertip. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't suspicious of him. That simple trust broke something inside him that he didn't know was still intact. "I want to do what I should have done for her mother," Rowan said softly. "I want to show up." Holden's expression thawed just a fraction, like ice cracking under unexpected warmth. He didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of Rowan's words settle between them. Rowan continued, his voice quieter now. "Is she happy?" Holden exhaled slowly. "She's joyful. She's bright. She's everything her mother was. She loves drawing. I love music. She's kind to everyone she meets. She has friends. She has stability. And she has me." Rowan nodded slowly, absorbing every word like medicine he didn't deserve. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For raising her. For loving her when I wasn't there." Holden looked away, jaw tight. "I didn't do it because of you. I didn't do it for praise." Rowan replied gently, "I know. That's why I'm thanking you." Lyran suddenly tugged on Rowan's sleeve, pulling his attention down to her bright eager face. "Can I show you something?" she asked excitedly. Rowan straightened, giving her his full attention. "Of course." She reached into her small backpack and pulled out another drawing, this one more detailed than the first. It showed 3 figures standing together. The same woman with sunset gold hair in the middle. Lyran on one side, smiling wide. And on the other side, a tall man with Rowan's unmistakable stern posture. But in the drawing, the man wasn't frowning. He was smiling. Something Rowan rarely did in real life. "She says this is you," Lyran said sweetly, pointing at the tall figure. Rowan felt his throat close completely. "Did she tell you that?" Lyran nodded with absolute certainty. "She says you were sad for a long time. But you're trying now. She said she's proud of you." Rowan couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe. Holden watched the exchange with visible surprise, clearly startled by the raw emotion breaking through the billionaire's carefully constructed exterior. For years Rowan had been feared in boardrooms. Respected on magazine covers. Envied by men who wanted his power and success. But here, in front of a 6-year-old girl who didn't even know his last name, he felt completely undone. Every wall he had built to protect himself from pain was crumbling. Every mask he wore to hide his failures was falling away. This child saw him more clearly than anyone had in decades. "Lyran," Rowan whispered, his voice shaking, "would it be all right if I came to see you again?" Her smile was immediate and radiant, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Yes. Mommy said you would." Rowan felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked him over. It wasn't closed. It wasn't peace. It was something far more terrifying. It was the beginning. The start of something he had no blueprint for. The start of earning trust he had never deserved. Holden cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "If you truly want to be part of her life, Mr. Vale, you'll need to prove it. Not with money. Not with gifts. Not with grand gestures that disappear after a week. But with consistency. With presence. By showing up even when it's inconvenient." Rowan met his gaze without hesitation. "I will. I promise." Holden held his stare for a long moment, searching for any crack in Rowan's resolve. Finding none, he finally gave a small nod. "Then we'll see." Lyran suddenly wrapped her arms around Rowan's side in a spontaneous hug, pressing her small body against him with complete trust. Rowan froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had hugged him without wanting something in return. But Lyran wanted nothing. She was simply offering warmth to a man she barely knew because her mother told her he needed it. Rowan slowly placed his hand on her back, holding her gently like she might break if he squeezed too hard. Something cracked open inside him. Something that had been locked away since the day he learned his daughter was gone. A second chance, fragile and terrifying and real, had been placed in his hands. And this time, Rowan Vale had no intention of wasting it. But the question remained, hanging in the cold cemetery air like a ghost waiting to be answered. Can a man who destroyed one relationship ever be trusted to protect another? Lyran believed he could. Her mother, somehow, believed he could. Now Rowan had to prove them right. No matter what it cost him. Later that evening, Rowan walked through the quiet hallway of Holden's small apartment, his footsteps soft against the worn wooden floor. The walls were lined with Lyran's drawings, colorful sketches of animals, stars, shapes, and dozens of pictures of the same red-haired woman. His daughter. Everywhere he looked, she was there. Smiling. Waving. Holding Lyran's hand. It was like walking through a shrine built by a child who refused to let her mother disappear. Rowan's chest tightened with every step as he studied each drawing, but Holden motioned him into the small living room where the real truth waited. A thin, worn folder sat on the coffee table like a bomb waiting to explode. Holden sat opposite him, his face heavy with exhaustion and old grief. "Everything you want to know is in there," he said quietly. "Everything I know too." Rowan reached for the folder slowly, his fingers trembling slightly as they touched the edges. He opened it and the first page hit him like a fist. Hospital forms. Birth records. Nurses' notes scribbled in tired handwriting at 3 in the morning. Emergency contact attempts. Repeated calls to a number that never answered. His number. Rowan turned each page with growing horror, reading the timestamps of every ignored call. 9 attempts in 2 days. 9 chances to save his relationship with his daughter before she died. 9 moments he threw away because business felt more important. One note, written by a night nurse in smudged ink, pierced him deeper than all the rest. The patient keeps asking if her father called back. Keeps saying she knows he will come. Patient anxious but hopeful. Rowan shut his eyes and pressed his hand against his mouth to stop the sound that wanted to escape. She had waited for him. She had believed in him until the very end. And he never came. Holden spoke softly from across the room. She stayed awake longer than she should have. The doctors wanted her to rest, to preserve her strength. But she refused. She wanted to wait for you. Rowan didn't answer. He couldn't. The words on the page blurred as tears he had suppressed for years finally forced their way to the surface. Why didn't anyone try harder? Rowan whispered, his voice broken. Holden frowned, a flash of old anger crossing his face. They tried. She tried. Her fiancé tried before he died. Even when I tried calling the number she kept repeating. But you were in another country, and your assistant said you were not to be disturbed under any circumstances. Rowan felt shame burn across his skin like fire. He remembered giving that order. He remembered telling his staff to block all unknown calls during that trip. He thought he was protecting his focus. Instead, he was sealing his daughter's fate. I didn't know, Rowan murmured, the excuse tasting like ash in his mouth. I didn't know she needed me. Holden's reply was gentle but carried the weight of 6 years of watching a child grow up without her family. You didn't check. Rowan bowed his head in silence. For the first time in his life, the weight of his fortune felt like a curse. Money had shielded him from discomfort, from inconvenience, from the messiness of real human connection. But it had also shielded him from his own daughter. It had built walls so high that her desperate cries couldn't reach him. I failed her, Rowan said, the words scraping out of his throat like broken glass. Holden didn't argue. He wasn't comfortable. He simply nodded. Yes. But you don't have to fail, Lyron. Rowan looked up and saw the little girl playing quietly on the floor with a worn plush toy. She glanced up at him and smiled, a smile so bright and trusting it almost hurt to witness. The same smile his daughter used to give him when she was young, before the arguments, before the distance, before he pushed her away with his expectations. He swallowed hard and turned back to Holden. What does she know about all of this? Holden exhaled slowly. She knows her mother is gone. She knows her father is gone. She knows I'm her guardian. And she knows you're important to her mother's story because she dreams about you more than she dreams about anyone else. Rowan's spine tingled. She dreams about me? Holden nodded. She calls you the sad man who needs her mommy. She says her mother visits you too. Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't dream about her. I haven't dreamed about her once since she died. Holden shrugged gently. Some people don't remember their dreams. But that doesn't mean she isn't there. The words hung in the air, heavy and haunting. Rowan closed the folder slowly and placed it back on the table. He had come looking for answers, but instead he found ghosts. Ghosts in hospital records. Ghosts in nurses' notes. Ghosts in the desperate calls of a daughter who never stopped believing her father would come. What happens now? Rowan asked, his voice rough but steady. Holden leaned back and met his eyes with a look that carried no judgment, only truth. Now you prove you're not the same man who ignored your daughter's calls. Now you show up. Not once. Not twice. But every single time Lyran needs you. Rowan inhaled deeply and nodded. I will. But as he sat in that small apartment surrounded by his daughter's memory, one question echoed louder than all the others. Can the man who missed his daughter's final breath ever truly be present for the child she left behind? Rowan didn't know. But he was about to find out. The next morning, Rowan drove alone without a driver, without assistance, without the armor of wealth he had worn for decades. The sun washed the road in gold as memories he had tried to forget resurfaced like ghosts clawing their way out of graves. Her laughter during childhood summers when she chased fireflies in the garden, her fierce independence when she announced she wanted to study art instead of business, her frustration the last time they spoke when he dismissed her dreams as foolish distractions. He had always believed she would outgrow her artistic ambitions, that reality would force her back to the empire he built. Instead, he had outgrown her, replacing his daughter with quarterly reports and board meetings that meant nothing now. The address Holden gave him led to a quiet row of modest apartment buildings on the edge of town where paint peeled from walls and children played in courtyards that had seen better days. Rowan parked and stepped out, his expensive shoes tapping against cracked pavement that seemed to judge every step he took. He climbed the stairs to the door labeled 3B, his heart hammering with a fear he couldn't name. The paint was peeling, the brass numbers crooked, the doormat faded from years of use. This was where she lived, not in luxury, not in comfort, but in freedom. The freedom he denied her by demanding she follow his path instead of her own. Rowan pushed the door open with the spare key Holden provided, and the hinges groaned as though protesting his intrusion into sacred ground. Dust hung in the air like suspended memories, each particle catching light from windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. The apartment had been untouched since her death, preserved by Holden as though keeping it frozen might somehow bring her back. Boxes of art supplies lined the walls, canvases stacked against corners like forgotten soldiers, unfinished sketches sprawled across the floor in organized chaos that spoke of a mind always creating, always dreaming. Rowan walked slowly, reverently, like entering a church where his sins waited to be counted. His fingers traced the edge of a table covered in dried paint splatters, and he realized he had never seen her workspace before, never asked to visit, never cared enough to understand the world she chose over his. He stopped at a painting sitting alone on an easel near the window, and his breath hitched so violently he had to grip the wall for support. It was a portrait rendered in soft blues and gentle light strokes that captured something photographs never could. It depicted her fiancé, a man Rowan never met, never acknowledged, never even knew existed until days ago. The man was smiling at something off-frame, his eyes filled with a joy so pure it hurt to witness, and her arms were wrapped around him from behind in a gesture of complete trust. The love in their eyes was unmistakable, undeniable, the kind of love Rowan had sacrificed in his own life for deals that felt important at the time but meant nothing now. He reached out but stopped short of touching the canvas, afraid his presence might contaminate something beautiful he had no right to witness. "You loved him," Rowan whispered to the empty room, and the words echoed back like an accusation. She had chosen a life with this man instead of the path Rowan tried to force on her, and now both of them were gone, leaving behind only a child who carried their memory in dreams. Rowan moved further into the apartment, his footsteps creaking on floorboards that groaned beneath the weight of his guilt. He found a journal on the coffee table, its leather cover worn from constant handling, a ribbon marking a page as though she had meant to return to it. His hands trembled as he picked it up, and for a moment he considered leaving it untouched, afraid of what truth might be waiting inside. But cowardice had cost him everything already, so he opened it to the marked page. The entry was simple, dated 3 days before the crash, written in her handwriting that still looked exactly as it did when she was 12, "I wish Dad would call back. I want him to be part of the baby's life. I told him about the engagement in a voicemail 2 months ago, but he hasn't responded. I still believe he cares deep down. I hope I'm right. I need to be right because I don't know how to raise a child without family, and I want my baby to know what a grandfather's love feels like even if I never really had a father's love myself. Rowan sank onto the couch, the journal falling from his hands as the words struck him like bullets tearing through flesh. His daughter had died still believing in him, still hoping he would change, still waiting for a man who never deserved her faith. He had received that voicemail, he remembered now with sickening clarity, but deleted it after hearing only the first few seconds because he assumed it was another plea for money or approval he wasn't willing to give. How many chances had he thrown away? How many moments could he have saved if he had simply listened? The questions circled his mind like vultures waiting for something to die, and he realized that something was the man he used to be, the man who valued control over connection, profit over presence, legacy over love. As he sat there in the silence, Lyron's voice echoed faintly in his memory, sweet and certain, "Mommy said you're trying now." Rowan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his shoulders shaking with sobs he had suppressed for 6 years. "I'm trying," he whispered to the empty apartment where his daughter's ghost lived in every brushstroke and unfinished canvas. "I promise I'm trying, and I won't stop until I become the man you need me to be." He stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and began gathering several sketches from the floor and the journal from the couch. Not to possess them, not to claim ownership of her memory, but to study them, to learn her in ways he never did when she was alive. On his way out, Rowan noticed a small note taped behind the door, yellowed with age and barely visible in the dim light. He carefully peeled it off, his heart racing with irrational hope. It read in his daughter's handwriting, clear and deliberate, "If Dad finds this place someday, tell him I forgive him. Tell him I always did." Rowan returned to Halden's apartment carrying a gentle determination he had never felt before, the kind that didn't announce itself with grand gestures but settled quietly into his bones like truth finally accepted. Lyron ran toward him the moment he stepped inside, her arms wide like greeting a long-lost friend, and the pure joy in her movement made something crack open in his chest. "You came back," she said cheerfully, her voice bright with the kind of trust that felt both precious and terrifying. Rowan knelt to her level, meeting her eyes with a steadiness he was still learning to maintain. "I said I would," he replied simply, and the weight of that promise felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. She beamed at him with a smile that belonged to her mother, then grabbed his hand and dragged him toward her art corner where papers and crayons were scattered across the floor in organized chaos. "I drew something new," Lyron announced, holding up a paper with the pride of someone presenting a masterpiece. The sketch was simple, rendered in bright crayons that bled slightly into each other, but the meaning was unmistakable. 3 figures holding hands in a line, Halden on one side, Lyron in the middle, and Rowan on the other. They stood together under a sun that took up half the page, and beneath their feet she had written in uneven letters, "Family." Rowan stared at it in silence, his throat closing around words that wouldn't form, because how could he possibly deserve to be included in this picture after everything he had failed to do? Lyron leaned closer, her small hand touching his arm with a gentleness that felt like absolution he hadn't earned. "Mommy said this is how it's supposed to look," she whispered, as though sharing a secret meant only for him. Rowan felt his chest shake with the effort of holding back tears that wanted to pour out like a dam finally breaking. "She told you that?" he asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Lyron nodded seriously, her copper hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. "She says you're doing good. She says she's not sad anymore because you're here now." The words landed like stones in water, sending ripples through every part of him that still carried guilt. Halden watched the exchange from the small kitchen where he was preparing dinner, his eyes softening in a way they hadn't before, as though he was finally starting to believe that Rowan's presence might be more than temporary performance. "She's been drawing like that since the day she said your name for the first time," Halden remarked, his voice carrying across the modest space with a weight that demanded attention. Rowan looked up sharply, confusion and wonder mixing on his face. "My name?" he asked. You never told me she knew it. Holden shrugged, stirring something on the stove that filled the apartment with the smell of home-cooked food. I didn't tell her. But one morning about 3 months ago, she woke up crying and said, "Grandpa Rowan needs help." I had no idea what she was talking about because I'd never mentioned you, never even said your name out loud in front of her. Rowan felt a chill crawl up his spine as he processed the impossibility of what Holden was describing. How could a child who had never met him, never heard his name, know not only who he was but that he needed help? What forces were moving through this little girl's dreams that connected her to people she should have no knowledge of? Lyron pointed at another drawing pinned to the wall with tape that was starting to yellow. "That's Mommy by the lake," she said matter-of-factly, as though discussing something everyone should already know. Rowan stood and approached the picture slowly, his heart beginning to race as he studied the details. It showed his daughter standing near a lake house with a dock extending into blue water, trees surrounding the property in protective embrace, mountains visible in the distance. The house was drawn with careful attention, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and large windows that faced the water. "Where is this?" Rowan asked, though something deep in his memory was already stirring with recognition. "Mommy said she wanted to go there," Lyron replied, tilting her head as she studied her own artwork. "She said she wanted to build it. With you." Rowan pressed a hand over his heart as the memory crashed into him with devastating clarity. The lake house wasn't just any fantasy, it was a specific dream his daughter had shared with him when she was 16 years old. They had been driving through the countryside during one of their rare peaceful moments, and she had pointed at a lake and said she wanted to build a house there someday, a place where she could paint and raise a family and finally feel at peace. He had dismissed it immediately, calling it impractical and childish, telling her that real estate was about investment value not emotional attachment. She had gone quiet for the rest of the drive, and he had thought he won the argument by introducing reality into her fantasy. Now he understood he had simply killed another piece of her hope, another fragment of the future she wanted to share with him. Lyron tugged on Holden's sleeve, pulling Rowan back from the painful memory. "Can Grandpa stay for dinner?" she asked with the innocent directness only children possess. Holden hesitated, his eyes moving between the little girl and the billionaire who had appeared in their lives like a storm that might either destroy or renew everything it touched. Rowan answered gently before Holden could respond, wanting to respect the boundaries of the home that had protected his granddaughter when he failed to. "Only if it's okay with him," Rowan said quietly. Lyron ran off to wash her hands, leaving the 2 men alone in a silence that carried the weight of everything unspoken. Holden turned from the stove and studied Rowan carefully, his expression unreadable. "You're showing up," he admitted softly, and the words felt like a test being passed one small increment at a time. "I didn't think you would. Most men with your kind of money find ways to make problems disappear instead of facing them." Rowan held his gaze without flinching. "I'm not trying to make her disappear. I'm trying to make up for disappearing." Holden seemed to weigh this answer, then nodded slowly. "Good. Because she's already lost everyone who shared her blood except you. If you break her heart now, there won't be anything left to repair." Rowan felt the threat and the plea behind those words, understanding that Holden wasn't just protecting Lyron from potential harm but from the specific harm Rowan had already proven himself capable of inflicting. "I won't disappear again," Rowan promised, and he meant it with a conviction that surprised even himself. Holden's shoulders relaxed fractionally, and he gestured toward the small dining table. "Then sit. Eat. Get to know your granddaughter properly." Rowan ate with them that night in the cramped kitchen that smelled of garlic and warmth, not as a billionaire trying to fix a problem, not as a man running from guilt, but as someone slowly learning how to be part of something he had lost before he ever understood its value. And as Lyron talked about her drawings and her dreams and the mother who visited her in sleep, Rowan felt something he hadn't experienced in years beginning to take root in the wasteland of his heart. It felt fragile and terrifying and absolutely necessary. It felt like belonging. A week passed before Rowan gathered the courage to do the one thing he had avoided for years, the conversation he knew would either begin healing or confirm that he had destroyed too much to ever repair. He needed to speak to his estranged son, Rylan, whose relationship with him had crumbled quietly after Rowan's divorce, after too many arguments about expectations and legacy, after too much pressure to become a reflection of a man Rylan never wanted to be. They hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years, not since Rylan walked out of a shareholders' meeting and told Rowan he was done pretending they had a relationship worth saving. Rowan dialed the number with shaking hands, each ring feeling like a countdown to judgment he absolutely deserved. Rylan answered after 3 rings, his voice flat and guarded in a way that made Rowan's stomach twist with regret. "It's been a long time," Rylan said coldly, not even bothering with a greeting. Rowan swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "Too long," he admitted, the words feeling inadequate for the years of silence between them. "What do you want?" Rylan asked, and the lack of warmth in his tone was like ice water reminding Rowan of every failure he had accumulated as a father. "To fix things," Rowan said honestly, forcing himself not to retreat into the defensive armor he usually wore during difficult conversations. "To tell you something important." Rylan sighed on the other end of the line, frustration bleeding through clearly. "Dad, we've done this before. You say you want to fix things, then you disappear into business meetings for months and act surprised when I stop answering your calls. I'm tired of the pattern." The accusation hit harder because it was completely true, a mirror held up to behavior Rowan had repeated so many times it became his default setting. Rowan's voice cracked slightly as he spoke the words that changed everything. "This isn't business. It's about your sister." The line went completely still, silence stretching between them with the weight of a name neither had spoken aloud in years. When Rylan finally responded, his voice had shifted from anger to something rawer, more vulnerable. "What about her?" he asked quietly, and Rowan could hear the pain underneath, the grief his son had carried alone because Rowan had been too consumed by his own guilt to help anyone else process theirs. Rowan took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff into unknown water. "She had a child," he said simply, letting the statement land without explanation. The silence that followed was so profound Rowan wondered if the call had disconnected, but then he heard Rylan's breathing change, becoming shallow and quick like someone trying to process information that didn't fit into their understanding of reality. "A child?" Rylan repeated slowly, testing the words as though they might be a trick. "She had a daughter. Her name is Lyran. She's 6 years old," Rowan continued, his voice steady now that the truth was finally being spoken. "And you're only telling me now?" Rylan's voice rose with disbelief and anger mixing together in a combination that made Rowan wince. "I only found out days ago," Rowan explained quickly. "I didn't know while she was alive. I wasn't there when she needed me, and I've been trying to make things right. For her. For Lyran. For us." The admission hung in the air between them, and Rowan waited for the explosion he expected, the rage that would confirm he had failed too completely to ever be forgiven. But Rylan didn't respond for several seconds, and when he did, his voice was quieter, thoughtful in a way that caught Rowan off guard. "Can I meet her?" he asked, and those 4 words felt like a door opening that Rowan had been certain was locked forever. Relief flooded through Rowan so powerfully his knees went weak. "Yes," he said immediately. "She'd like that. I think she'd really like that." They set a date for the following Saturday, and when Rowan hung up the phone he had to sit down because the weight of what had just happened threatened to overwhelm him. One conversation couldn't erase years of damage, but it was a beginning, and beginnings were all he had to work with now. When Rowan returned to Halden's apartment to tell him about the call, Halden was cautious in the way someone becomes when they've seen too many promises broken. "Your son," Halden began carefully, wiping his hands on a dish towel, "does he have the same habits you did? The disappearing? Choosing work over people?" The question was fair, and Rowan didn't flinch from it. "No," he said firmly. "He's better than me. He learned what not to do by watching me fail." Halden studied him for a long moment, then seemed to accept the answer. "Good. Because Lyran doesn't need more people in her life who show up once and vanish. She needs consistency, not grand gestures followed by silence." That Saturday afternoon, Rowan brought Rylan to meet Lyran at a nearby park where children played on swings and parents watched from benches scattered under trees that provided shade from the late morning sun. Lyran was sitting on a blanket with Holden, drawing another picture, when Rowan approached with his son beside him. She looked up, her copper hair catching the light, and her face brightened immediately when she recognized Rowan. But when she saw the younger man standing beside him, something shifted in her expression, a kind of knowing that seemed impossible for a child her age. She stood and ran toward them with the fearless excitement only children possess, her small legs carrying her across the grass until she stopped directly in front of Rylan. "Are you my uncle?" she asked, tilting her head as she studied him with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Rylan knelt slowly, his expression shifting through shock, wonder, and something that looked like grief as he took in the child who carried his sister's features so clearly. His voice came out rough and unsteady. "Yeah," he whispered. "I guess I am." Lyran threw her arms around his neck without hesitation, hugging him with the complete trust that came from a heart that hadn't yet learned to protect itself from disappointment. Rylan's eyes filled with tears as he held her, and over the child's shoulder he met his father's gaze with an expression that said everything words couldn't capture. Rowan watched them talk and laugh as Lyran showed Rylan her drawings and told him stories about the dreams where her mother appeared, and he felt something fragile and beautiful rising within him that he barely recognized. It felt like renewal, like watching broken pieces begin to fit back together in ways that created something new rather than just restoring what was lost. Later that afternoon, after Lyran had convinced Rylan to push her on the swings and help her collect interesting rocks, Rylan approached Rowan where he sat on a bench beside Holden. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lyran chase a butterfly across the grass, before Rylan spoke quietly. "She looks like her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Rowan nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "I know," he finally managed. Rylan exhaled deeply, his shoulders dropping as though setting down weight he'd been carrying for years. "Dad, maybe this is your second chance," he said carefully. "Maybe ours too. Maybe we can learn to be a family again by being family to her." The words hit Rowan with the force of hope he didn't know he was still capable of feeling. Rowan felt tears building behind his eyes, hot and insistent, but for once he didn't fight them. "I hope so," he whispered. "I really hope so." Rylan placed a hand on his father's shoulder, the first physical contact they'd shared in years, and the gesture carried forgiveness that hadn't been fully earned but was being offered anyway. "Just don't waste it," Rylan said firmly. "Don't waste her the way you wasted us." The statement was both plea and warning, and Rowan heard it for what it was, one final chance to become the man he should have been all along. "I won't," Rowan promised, and this time he meant it with every fractured piece of his heart. As Lyran ran back toward them, her hands full of flowers she had picked, Rowan understood that redemption wasn't something granted in a single moment but earned through countless small choices to show up, to stay present, to choose love over everything else that had once seemed so important. A month later, Rowan told Holden he wanted to take Lyran somewhere important, somewhere that would either prove his commitment was real or reveal it as another empty gesture from a man who specialized in promises he never kept. Holden hesitated, his protective instincts warring with the hope that maybe, just maybe, Rowan had actually changed into someone worthy of the trust Lyran placed in him so easily. "Where are you taking her?" Holden asked, his tone careful but not accusatory. "Somewhere her mother dreamed of," Rowan replied simply, and something in his voice made Holden nod slowly and agree. Lyran was thrilled when Rowan arrived to pick her up, bouncing on her toes with excitement as she climbed into the car wearing her favorite dress, the blue one with flowers that she said her mother liked best. "Where are we going?" she asked in the car, kicking her legs happily against the seat as the city slowly gave way to the countryside. Rowan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart swelling with an emotion he was still learning to name. "Somewhere your mommy dreamed of," he said, echoing his words to Holden. "Somewhere I should have taken her a long time ago." The drive was long, 3 hours into countryside that became increasingly remote, until winding roads led them past farms and forests and finally to a serene lake surrounded by tall pines that stood like sentinels guarding something sacred. The air shimmered with calm as Rowan parked the car and helped Lyran out, her small hand fitting perfectly into his in a way that felt both natural and miraculous. The water glowed beneath the late afternoon sun, its surface so smooth it looked like glass that might shatter if touched, and the mountains in the distance provided a backdrop that seemed pulled from a painting his daughter might have created. Lyran gasped softly, her eyes going wide as she took in the scene before her, and her grip on Rowan's hand tightened. "This is the place from my dreams," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and recognition. Rowan felt his breath catch in his chest as he knelt beside her. "Yes," he confirmed gently. "Your mommy talked about this lake when she was young. She wanted a home here someday, a place where she could paint and watch the water and raise a family in peace." The memory of dismissing her dream still stung like an open wound, but now he had a chance to honor what he had once destroyed. Lyran held his hand tightly as they walked toward the water's edge, her small steps matching his larger ones in a rhythm that felt like healing. "She wants you to be here too," Lyran said simply, stating it as fact rather than hope. Rowan led her toward a small wooden dock that extended into the lake, the boards weathered but solid beneath their feet. The sound of water lapping gently against the posts created a peaceful music that seemed designed to wash away years of mistakes. "Do you know why I brought you here?" Rowan asked, turning to face his granddaughter. Lyran tilted her head, studying him with those copper-bright eyes that saw more than a child should be able to see. "Because Mommy said you should," she answered simply, as though this explained everything. Rowan knelt on the dock so they were eye level, his expensive pants absorbing moisture from the damp wood, but he didn't care about things like that anymore. "Because I want to build the lake house she dreamed of," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "For you. For us. For the family she wanted but never got to have." Lyran's eyes widened with joy so pure it almost hurt to witness. "Like the one she showed me?" she asked breathlessly. "Exactly like the one she drew," Rowan confirmed, and he pulled out the sketch he had taken from his daughter's apartment, the one that matched this location perfectly despite her never having been here. How had she known this place existed? How had she drawn it with such accuracy? The questions felt less important than the answer they suggested. Some connections transcended death, some dreams refused to die even when their dreamers did. Lyran hugged him fiercely, her tiny arms wrapping around his neck with a strength that belied her small frame, and Rowan felt tears he no longer tried to hide slip down his face. "Mommy is happy," Lyran whispered into his ear. "I can feel it. She says thank you." Rowan closed his eyes and let the breeze carry the weight of everything he had lost and everything he had found, understanding that grief and joy could exist in the same moment without canceling each other out. He held his granddaughter and made silent promises to the daughter he would never see again, vows that felt more binding than any business contract he had ever signed. Holden watched from a distance where he stood beside the car, his arms folded across his chest, not judging and not intruding but simply observing the gentle transformation of a man he once believed incapable of change. When Rowan caught his eye across the distance, Holden nodded slowly, and in that simple gesture was an acknowledgement that trust was being earned one moment at a time. Rowan stood with Lyran at the water's edge, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon and painting everything in shades of gold and copper that matched his granddaughter's hair. He spoke his promise quietly but firmly, knowing somehow that his daughter could hear him wherever she was. "I couldn't save your mother," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I wasn't there when she needed me most, and I'll carry that failure until the day I die. But I will protect you, Lyran. I will honor her memory by being the man she needed me to be, even if I'm doing it too late for her." Lyran squeezed his hand gently, her small fingers warm against his. "You already are," she said with the certainty only children possess. "Mommy says you're exactly who you need to be now." Rowan felt a tear slip down his cheek, then another, and he didn't bother wiping them away because there was no shame in crying for the daughter he lost and the granddaughter he had found. A new beginning stood before him, fragile and terrifying and beautiful in equal measure, possible only because of the little girl who carried his daughter's light forward into a future he thought he had destroyed. The lake rippled softly as wind moved across its surface, and for just a moment Rowan could have sworn he heard music carrying on that breeze, a melody his daughter used to hum when she was young and still believed her father would choose her over everything else. Holden approached them slowly, his footsteps careful on the dock, and when he reached them he placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder with a weight that spoke of acceptance earned rather than freely given. "This is good," Holden said simply. "This is what she would have wanted." Rowan nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. Lyran looked up at both men, the two people who had chosen to love her despite having no obligation to do so, and her smile was radiant. "Can we come back?" she asked hopefully. "Can we build the house and live here sometimes?" Rowan looked at Holden, a silent question passing between them, and Holden's slight nod gave permission Rowan knew he needed. "Yes," Rowan promised, his voice steady now. "We'll build it together. All of us. And it will be a place where your mother's memory lives in every room, where you can grow up knowing you were loved by people who would have given anything to keep her alive but will give everything to honor her through you." The promise settled over them like a blessing, and as the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in colors that seemed designed specifically for this moment, Rowan Vale finally understood what his daughter had tried to tell him years ago when she begged him to choose her over his empire. Love wasn't something you scheduled between meetings or fit into gaps in your calendar. It was the thing you built your entire life around, the foundation that made everything else matter, the only legacy worth leaving behind. And Rowan Vale, once a man haunted by regret and defined by the daughter he failed, finally stepped fully into a future with something he had not felt in a very long time. It wasn't redemption, because some failures were too profound to ever fully redeem. But it was something equally powerful and far more honest. It was hope. I hoped that the child standing beside him, holding his hand with complete trust, might grow up knowing that even broken people could learn to love well if given enough chances and blessed with enough grace. The lake bore witness to his transformation, its waters holding the reflection of three people who had become family not through blood alone but through choice, through showing up, through refusing to let tragedy have the final word in a story that was still being written. Thanks for watching, and make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more interesting stories like this coming your way from this channel.